The agenda today, we've just had the introduction and toast. The major item for the meeting are the chapter updates. This is part of our traditional annual meeting that we have. Every chapter gets an opportunity to give us an update on what's been going on there. And then I'll give a brief update on what's been happening in the overall organization. And then we're really excited today to have Curt Meine with us, who's going to give a kind of an invited talk. We don't have any idea what Curt is really going to say. He's kept it kind of a secret, but Curt's one of those guys who I've found always worth listening to. So really looking forward to that. And then we will have a video by Eric Preston. Unfortunately, Eric could not be with us today, and he had both some family and work obligations that prevented him from doing what we were hoping to see today. But Eric did put together about a month or two ago a virtual field trip on the Mounds View grassland, which was kind of our inspiration for wanting to do this. So I'm going to show that. That was done by the Natural Resources Foundation of Wisconsin. I'm going to show that video at the end. It's just a 5-minute video, but it's really kind of amazing. It's a collection of mostly wildlife cam shots from his Badger Cam series. So that's how we'll end up the meeting. So we're up to 73 people logged in at this point, and I got to say that doing this virtually, we've got people from all over the organization. Which we normally do not have at an annual picnic. Our normal attendance is about 25 or 30 people. And it's usually the board members and a few members from the local chapter wherever we hold the picnic. So this is an advantage, I guess, of doing these virtual events, and we'll be doing that, I think, more in the future. I also want to put out a special welcome. We were quite surprised that quite a few people signed up for this event who were not members of the Prairie Enthusiasts and who are maybe getting involved with us for the very first time. And I wanted to put out a special welcome to all of you. And thank you for joining us today, and encourage you to take a look at the TPE website. And if you like what you see today, maybe consider joining the organization. So now the main part of the agenda are the annual updates from the chapters and from the central organization. And this is just a map of all of our chapters in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois. We don't usually get to show this, but for those of you who are new, or even you've been around for a while, it's really remarkable what kind of a geographical range this organization actually covers. So rather than doing the usual alphabetical order today, I think I'm going to do this from west to east. So we'll start with the Many Rivers chapter, and I'm not sure who in each chapter is going to give the update, but if you could let us know who you are, and remember to unmute yourself, please. So I don't know, Deanna, are you going to do the update for the Many Rivers chapter?
Sure, Scott, I can start if you're ready.
Yep.
Yeah, like Scott was saying, we're the Many Rivers chapter. We're on the very westmost of the areas over in kind of south central Minnesota. We've been continuing for the most part, even with the COVID issue, as far as business as normal. There were a couple burns done this spring. The work parties right now have been a little bit less, probably more so because it's been so hot. But we're still working on some of the existing projects that we have been working on in the city of Mankato, another one on the north end of St. Peter, a treaty site. There have been an article recently put in the Mankato Free Press to kind of highlight the Many Rivers and what we do. And it was noted that one of the local state parks, Minneopa, has had some bison introduced a couple years, or I'm not sure exactly how long ago, but that's actually really helped to just get the prairie word out there, and what it is and what it all entails. So that's been helpful, at least as far as just getting people more engaged. That's about it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Deanna. So next up will be the Minnesota Driftless chapter. Steve, is that going to be you?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so the Minnesota Driftless chapter, probably like most of the chapters, we were fairly impacted by the COVID-19 restrictions.
Steve, you may want to introduce yourself there.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I'm the president, or I guess chair is the correct term, of the chapter, and I'm located in Winona, Minnesota. And I think right now all of our board members are also in the Winona County, Houston County area. But our chapter area does include Rochester, and we're making efforts to engage with them, and I'll talk about a little bit of those efforts in a bit. So we were able to do 2 field trips, and we did those under the TPE field trip policy in light of the COVID-19 issue. And they were at Vinegar Ridge, I think that's a scientific natural area, as well as the Rushford Sand Barrens Scientific Natural Area. And I was at the Rushford Sand Barrens one, and it was well attended. People enjoyed it. We don't actually do official chapter prescribed burns, but we have many people in the chapter that assist with prescribed burns, and we have equipment that the chapter owns that can be used. And so several chapter members and the chapter equipment was used in assisting with quite a few prescribed burns this spring. We've been engaged with the planning efforts for the 2021 Prairie Enthusiast meeting, which will be in February in Winona, Minnesota. And we've already got a venue selected. And I think we have a meeting set up. It's either this month or next month when Diane Hills will be joining us down here to meet with the venue people and get fully engaged in the planning efforts for that meeting. So we're going back to Rochester, a nice project that we've been started on is we're working with the city of Rochester on a savanna restoration project at a city park. And it's some remnant oak woods or oak savanna, but as folks might imagine, it's got quite a bit of buckthorn on it. But Prairie Enthusiast is a cooperator on a grant that the city of Rochester received funds for, and the Prairie Enthusiast will provide in-kind services in the form of work parties for various things such as clearing buckthorn or collecting seed. And so that's up and rolling. The Minnesota Conservation Corps, I don't know if that's the exact name of it, but that's young people crews that the state of Minnesota mobilizes to help with stuff. They've already started the buckthorn clearing, and the first Prairie Enthusiast chapter workday is getting scheduled right now. Another thing that we have gotten rolling along is the Prairie Enthusiast is assisting with what's called the Pleasant Valley Pollinator Corridor Project. And so that's a pollinator corridor that's been identified just outside of Winona. It actually extends into Winona, whereby just a whole bunch of different approaches are being used to conserve prairie plants, prairies themselves, pollinators, the whole interdependent system. And so it involves actually restoring bluff prairies within that corridor, but then it also involves roadside management and restoration or recreation of prairie vegetation in roadsides, and then even homeowners' lawns. And so quite a bit of money was obtained from a lawns to legumes program to assist with this. And so that's a nice project that keeps building steam. And then I think the final thing, some of our activities, our chapter will have its annual summer picnic in a couple weeks, and we'll be holding that at a nice location just outside of Stockton, Minnesota. I think that's it.
Great, thanks, Steve. So next up, St. Croix Valley chapter. Yvonne, would that be you?
Yes, it is. Hi, my name is Yvonne Hunt, and I'm the chair of the St. Croix Valley chapter. And we include Polk, St. Croix and Pierce County in Wisconsin, and Washington County in Minnesota. And our focus right now is a small native remnant in Washington County along the St. Croix River that we've been managing for 15, 16, 17 years. The property is owned by the Minnesota Department of Transportation, or MDOT, as it's affectionately called. And they've decided that it's surplus property and they're going to put it up for sale. Naturally, we're really unhappy about that. The site consists of 2 acres of native remnant on the Bluff side. And just across the road are 8 acres that we planted with local ecotype seed. And we are running into a lot of roadblocks because MDOT is a huge agency. It's a bureaucracy, and everyone that we talk to is very sympathetic, but there's nothing they can do. So that's our focus right now, to figure out a plan how we can protect this property and wrestle it away from MDOT. Otherwise, we had our burn breaks all set up. And the next day it snowed, and the next day they put a burn ban on, so we got nothing burned. We've had 2 field trips, one to look at the prairie smoke, and one to collect seed. And that's about it.
Great, thank you, Yvonne. So next is Chippewa Savannas. Do we have somebody from there?
This is Carol Jean Coventry. I'm the chair of the Chippewa Savannah chapter. We encompass in Wisconsin chapters of Pepin, Dunn, and Eau Claire counties. We have 2 major projects that continue to take a lot of our time, and both of them are very complex properties, both in their geography or their ecology and in their management. The first is a property actually owned by a group of 16 organizations called we call the Alliance. Maybe Kathy Stahl could remind me what the complete title is, but it's a group of organizations, conservation organizations and sports clubs, which own approximately 180 acres. Is that right, Kathy?
It's 170, about 178 acres for the Dobbs Landing.
Okay, Dobbs Landing, 178 acres. And that includes an oxbow of a river and some sandy areas and some brushy areas. We have been working on this now for a number of years. We're beginning to see some of the effects of our labors. We've had lots of wonderful work parties out there and continue to do so. We just received a $20,000 grant from the Wisconsin Habitat Improvement Program, and we're going to be clearing out brush and trees from another large section that we haven't really attacked yet on that property. The big thing about this property is that it's open to the public year-round, and we have a lot of we have to sort of change. We're in the process of changing the culture of this site because it was neglected for many, many years, and it was kind of a dumping ground and also a playground for ATVs and that kind of thing. And now we're trying to make it more, trying to maintain the hunting and fishing that people have used, but also make it more enjoyable for people to just visit without motorized vehicles. So for example, this spring we put up a new barrier so that ATVs cannot, and cars and trucks cannot travel over some of the sites areas where we've done improvements and have planted seed and done weed pulling and taking out woodland trees or shrubs. So we work with all aspects of the Alliance, but we do almost all of the management on the property. So, and then our other site is called, we call Seymour. It's just north of Eau Claire. And it's also a complex site because it's a right of way of the is it NSP or is it Exxon? Excel. It's a right of way of Excel electricity, but it has a native remnant, and it's a beautiful remnant. We've also worked on this for years. We had a little gap in the last couple of years where we haven't done much, but we now have been reinvigorated by a couple of our members taking this on and have just created a plan of how to move forward on that property. Not only do we have to deal with the electric company, but there's a rod and gun club that abuts this property, and also part of their property is part of the Prairie area. So a lot of different dynamic interests there. The Seymour property actually could be eventually part of a conservation route from Eau Claire up to this property. I mean, we're hoping to create sort of a natural corridor for all kinds of plants and animals. Those are the two main things that we're doing right now, and we're happy to have involvement for anybody in our area. So thanks for listening.
Scott, this is Kathy Stahl, and
Yes.
I don't know if this is the right forum for this, but one of the issues that we have in the first property Carol Jean talked about with is the vandalism. And I would love to hear about what other chapters do to help tackle that issue.
Interesting question. This probably isn't a great venue because we've got a lot of people here and a lot to get through today. But
I realize that, but at some point it would be fun to hear from people, and if they could send their suggestions to our chapter, that we would love to hear them. Thanks.
No, it's muted.
yeah, that's a really great thing, and I guess I will pass that.
On mute and it doesn't work.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So I will pass that that suggestion on, and we'll certainly consider that. Next would be the Coulee region chapter. So Jim, is that going to be you?
Yeah, it'll be me. Jim Regala from the Coulee region chapter. We're kind of centered around La Crosse, Wisconsin, 6 counties, so we're quite large, and our membership is spread out. So we don't have a lot of joint work days, but a lot of our members have properties. So they typically work on their own on their properties. And I'm actually hoping that the pandemic was a good thing for that, because a lot of our members are also retirees and spend a lot of time traveling about. So hopefully they're at home working on their prairies right now. We have had a couple work days. A group of us are involved with some friends groups. So one is in the La Crosse area. La Crosse owns some Bluff Prairie remnants up on within the city limits. So there's a friends group in town, Friends of the Bluffland, that works up there. And as is in most cases, there's a lot of overlap between these organizations. So 5 or 6 of us belong to the Prairie Enthusiasts. We've been working up there, mainly trying to control sumac and aspen, but also there's a ton of buckthorn to work on. So plenty to do there. The other site is Holland Sand Prairie. There's a friends group there as well. And we've been doing some work there. In fall, we do seed collecting and dispersal, interseeding. But this time of the year, again, we've been trying to keep the sumac in check. As far as the burn season this year, we as a chapter did not do anything at all. Some individuals did some burns. but we just shut everything down and hoping to do quite a bit this fall. Typically we don't, but I think a lot of people are pretty far behind and hope to do a lot of fall burns. The other thing are the field trips. So we got shut down. We had 3 scheduled in April and May that we didn't host, but then we had 2 since then. You know, they haven't, you know, it's not quite the same, kind of limited as far as interaction, because one of the trips was actually meant to do some botany work, you know, bring out field or bring out the keys and go through different species. That's kind of tough to do when you're trying to social distance, but we did the best we could. And we hope to have some more field trips later this year. I think I'll try to have 2 or 3 more. And the last thing I want to mention is, so Dan Carter has started his position. I think Scott will probably talk about what he's been up to, but he's already made 4 visits to the Coulee region chapter, looking at sites and evaluating them and providing some information. Extremely valuable. I joined him on 3 of those. And just even for myself, just to talk about ideas, exchange different you know, plans for management, or if there's plantings being planned, you know, kind of going through how those might come about. So far that's been very successful for us, and hopefully he's going to come and make a few more visits up here. And I think that's all I've got. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Jim. So next up will be Southwest Wisconsin. So Gary, I think that's going to be you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's been about 3 sites that are under management down there. Iris Drive, Prairie Bush Clover, Eldred Prairie, and some stuff on Bora Creek where Gary Adams, I have stepped in to do some brush eradication at Bora Creek, but it's actually the a north section of Bora Creek, which was the original Heather's Prairie. That's the best quality prairie on the site. So that's the area that Gary and I have focused on our brush eradication. And we've had just striking results with getting rid of sumac and other woody species by our technique we've been trying. We'll remow it a couple of times and let it grow back and spot spray it. So we've had almost 100% eradication of the sumac on the large clones that we went after. Gary and I also have worked a lot on Iris Drive. We have every Monday we have a work party up there for about 3 hours. I suppose next year when I hit 74, it'll be down to 2 hours, and then after that it'll just keep reducing. but right now we can get 3 hours. So we're making progress there too. I've calculated that I've spot sprayed about between 10 and 15,000 gray dogwood there this year. The rain and warm temperatures seem to be germinating a lot of seed that's been dormant in the ground, and stuff that we thought we had under control, it just went wild. So we've stayed on top of that. And I don't know what's going on at Eldred Prairie. Jack has been in charge of that, and he's been lining up volunteers, and he's had hired a fella to do about $1,000 worth of work down there, cutting brush and herbiciding. And in other years, he's lined up, I think it's probably a minimum security prison crew out of Prairie du Chien that came up there to pull weeds and stuff. But because of the virus this year, that activity was canceled. And I don't know what's going on over on Sylvan Road with Linda over there. We don't get much feedback from her. Jack stays in touch with her, but I can't really speak to that. But generally, in our chapter, we're still hanging on there. We've been having phone meetings, which all of us dislike. We'd rather be together in person, the same as what this meeting and the picnic is about. Nothing can take the place of visual contact and talking to one another. But personally, my concerns are with all the rain we've been having. It's getting harder and harder to stay ahead of the invasion of woody species and non-native species on this site. And I'm deeply concerned of where it's going to go in the future. But like all of us, we just put our heads down and keep walking forward on this rather than abandoning the places. So And we've had some good get-togethers. In last winter there, we had a dinner at a nightclub near us there and had a good turnout. And it's always nice to see people, and a lot of these people we've been seeing for decades and decades. So it's nice to catch up to them. And last winter I traveled with Scott to almost all of our chapters to visit the chapters, and that was a really wonderful experience, reconnecting with a lot of people that I knew and hadn't seen for a long time. And I enjoyed Scott's company. He's a fairly intelligent guy to have a conversation with, so I enjoyed that. So yeah, any other questions, I'd try to answer them, but I just kind of stay within the boundaries of what I can accomplish, and it's limited, but we keep plugging away at it and keep the woody stuff at bay, and then contacting some landowners over there and keeping in touch with them about their projects on private property. So I guess that's about all I got to report on at this point.
Great, thank you, Gary. Next up is Northwest Illinois. I am not sure anybody is on from Northwest Illinois. I know Jim Raichi and Ricky were not able to make it today. Is there anybody from Northwest Illinois? Nope, I guess not. That chapter is still very active, a lot going on. I visited down there actually a couple of times before the COVID put a stop to everything. They're undergoing some transition. Ed Strensky, who has been running what is effectively a nonprofit land management and seed production business, which is a big source of funding for the restoration work that the chapter does. Ed is retiring at the end of this year, so the chapter is doing quite a bit of reevaluation about where they're going to go with that business, and that's kind of what I guess I would report on Northwest Illinois. But that chapter has a very major collaboration with a very large, well-endowed land trust, the Joe Davies Conservation Foundation, and do a lot of management work for JDCF on sites that JDCF owns. So I think next up would be Prairie Bluff chapter. Who's gonna, Jerry, would that be you? You're muted there if it is.
Okay, I should be on mute now.
Yep, you're good.
Okay. So for the state of Prairie Bluff, we only got a couple of burns in before our Greene County pulled the plug on any burning whatsoever. And then the state parks closed, and we were inundated at our more popular sites with the general public that made us really want to stay away. So we retreated to our newer, lesser known properties where Skinner, for one, we have made significant progress. There is a wooded ravine that bisects the main prairie from a small portion on the very west end. We have since hacked and hacked and hacked and have created sunlight through the whole area now, so that hopefully in years to come, the plant communities can merge. Moving on to news in our area. The DNR has put a proposal up to allow ATVs on some rail to trail hike and bike trails in our area, Badger State Trail and Sugar River Trail. And one of our members he has waged personal warfare against invasive species along mile 13 of the Badger State Trail, where there is a significant remnant prairie, really nice. He was especially concerned that ATVs would be allowed to race through there and further degrade that area. And so we've helped him to publicize, get the word out, and distribute some petitions and things to get people on record that they don't want ATVs. And a ray of hope was interjected this past week. There was a DNR person, Brian O'Connor, who decided to do a plant inventory on mile 13. And he was really excited that he uncovered a new population of very rare species of pediomelum, which is a, what is it called? Scurf pea, I believe. And he said, you know of it, Rich? Maybe he's not there. And he says he believes it might be the only extant population in the state, barring a rediscovery of Jim Sines locality in Grant County. Yeah. So that is potentially significant news in our petition to keep this as hike and bike and no ATVs.
Yeah, this is Rich. Yeah,
yeah.
That's a Western species. Yeah, and it's exceedingly rare this far east. Yeah.
All right. Is that it, Jerry, or you got a little more?
If there's time, I have one more thing. Can you see me on the camera? Okay. I bought this book when it came out, Curt Meine's Driftless Reader, and I read it, and I decided to revisit it just a while ago, and something in the introduction about geological aspect of the driftless, it says that the credit for the geologist William Keating is he was a member of Major Stephen Long's 1805 expedition into the upper Mississippi Valley in Minnesota. And he provided the first recognition and understanding of the driftless area phenomenon. And so I thought, Stephen Long, Keating, that sounds familiar. I think I have something about that. And so sitting on my bookshelves for 30-some years unread was this book by this Keating guy who made this was a different expedition though. This was in 1823. They made an expedition. And what I found interesting from the Prairie Bluff standpoint was that in the introduction to his work, he had to apologize for using such words as prairie and bluff, because these words were not mentioned in American dictionaries in those times. So I just thought it was interesting that 200 years ago, Prairie Bluff chapter could not have been in the American vernacular.
Thank you, Jerry, for that little bit of interesting history. I like that. All right. Next up, I guess, would be Empire Sock. Willis, is that going to be you?
Yeah, I hope so.
All right.
Am I unmuted? I guess I'm unmuted.
Yes. Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So this spring we got a few burns in before the ban was put in. I guess we're thinking maybe 15% or so of what we wanted to burn. And the last few years we've been hosting a Master Naturalist program, which it's pretty much hands-on. So we're not sure when that will start up again. Maybe in the spring we can do it. This all depends on the COVID. We do have 5 interns working this summer and an intern chief, and that's been going really well. I want to mention a couple areas. The Maley project, which is in Sauk City, it's a 28 acres, and they've got a crew there that does remarkable success with restoring this remnant. And they also spent a fair bit of time this spring removing trash would have been dumped in one corner of this property. And also this is the second year they're doing a monarch butterfly survey. And they also got a grant to build a kiosk for that site. So things are really going well at that property. And also I'd like to mention that Gary Birch was able to get a grant for a DR mower for the Smith-Reinert drumlin, which is in, let's see, Southwest Dane County. And then we do have field trips that started up again. And the main thing we're working on right now is our chapters is working on trying to raise money to add a 305-acre parcel to our current Mounds View project. We call it the Hanley Project. It's the Hanley Family Trust. And it abuts our Mounds View project, our Mounds View grassland. And the Mounds View right now is 570 acres. And this would be a great addition, 305 acres. It's in pretty good shape, but we need over $2 million to raise to get this property purchased. We have Rich Henderson has been able to get some stewardship money on an 80-acre parcel of that, and then we've got the DNR has approved stewardship money for the rest, but that has to go through the legislature, so we're waiting on that. And also, Fish and Wildlife has put in some money for this project in a huge grant that they submitted to the federal government. And again, we have not heard anything from that. Because of the size of this proposed addition, we've actually hired a professional fundraising group. And when a group of us have been meeting with them pretty much every week for about a month. And things are going pretty well. We're making pretty good progress, and we're getting a lot of good ideas as to how to raise money. So I think if this is successful, even if it's not successful, if people would like some input as to how to go about raising money for land protection, land additions, you can contact us, or Diane Hills would actually be a great resource for that. And I think, as someone else mentioned, with the virus, we got quite a few more visitors to our sites this spring than normal. And so far it's been good. I'm unaware of any vandalism. And I think that's it for me, for us.
Great. Thank you, Willis. Next up would be Prairie Sands. I know David Hamel had to leave. Is there somebody who can just give us a quick update on what's happening with Prairie Sands?
John Schillinglaw here.
Oh, good, John. Thank you.
I think that there are two things I'd like to mention. First is that our area comprises quite a bit of different topography, but a lot of our members have properties and they're managing for Karner blue butterflies, and we've been cooperating with the state as well as the federal government to try to assess metapopulation dynamics with Karner blue butterflies. And that's a research project that's going to be ongoing for quite a while, because other than Wisconsin, the population, and possibly Michigan, the populations of Karner blue butterflies are getting weaker and have dropped out in Indiana and Minnesota. So we continue to, that was one of our primary areas of interest. And several of us are looking forward to meeting Dan Carpenter on our private properties and getting information about just general management questions.
Great. Thank you very much, John. Appreciate it. And last but most certainly not least is our Glacial Prairies chapter in Southeast Wisconsin. I think, Alice, is that going to be you?
Yes, it would be. Yes. My name is Alice Merck, and I am the current chair of the Glacial Prairies chapter. One We live in the most populated part of the state. We're fairly large. We have like 36% of the entire state's population down here. And there's a land trust every 1,000 feet. So very early on, we decided to concentrate on being partners and educators. So we focus on education regarding the prairie and oak savanna ecosystem for both adults and children. And we talk to a variety of groups. We have developed a curriculum, the history, significance, and current status of Wisconsin's tallgrass, prairie, and oak savanna. And we've handed that out to a number of high schools, grade schools, and colleges. It is huge. It's 407 slides with footnotes and all that good stuff. So teachers can just pick out of it what they want. And it's been very well received so far. We have 2 prairies that we take care of directly, Edelman Schwartz, and we finally got the easement on Shining Oaks, which is in western Jefferson County, and it's a beautiful piece of land with a wetland and a sedge meadow and a prairie and oak savanna. So we're looking forward to working on that. We had plans this spring, but like everybody else's plans, it went by the wayside with this horrible virus. So currently we have partnerships with Elm Grove Master Gardeners in Dousman with the Historical Park. We have a partnership with Adams Birding Conservancy. We go work parties out there with the UW Whitewater School. We have a partnership with Mayville Middle School, Prairie Home Cemetery, which sounds a little morbid, but they have a great burial area which we help manage, that is all prairie. And we have helped Willowbrook Conservancy in Heartland. We have a partnership with the UW Milwaukee at Waukesha Field Station. We have used the field station for our burn schools, and we also help manage with work parties and burns out there. We just recently signed an agreement with UW Milwaukee for managing the Benedict Prairie. And so now we have permission to manage the Benedict Prairie, which has led to a whole bunch of people from down in Racine and Kenosha who want to be part of this. And so we've got a team going on down there. We have also developed a team of people that work on the DNR lands as volunteers for state natural areas in the Southern Kettle Moraine. And we've also developed a new team that is going to adopt some state natural areas in Genesee Oak Opening, Armstrong Oak Opening, and Lulu Lake. So we are pretty excited about that. Things are pretty slow. 1 or 2 people are going out to work on prairies right now, but we weren't able to do any burns. We had a burn scheduled for the field station this spring at Waukesha, and of course all the university systems just shut down, so we weren't able to do that. Right now, we are working on, with the American Bird Conservancy, we're working on an RCPP grant, a Regional Conservation Partnership Program grant, which is very exciting because in, let me see, Milwaukee, Racine, Kenosha, Walworth, and Waukesha counties, landowners particularly will be eligible for some grants and for technical assistance and help with their own prairies. So we are jumping on the back of Dan Carter, identifying landowners in those regions, getting ready for this grant, which we hope will start next January. We have our annual picnic and general meeting coming up for the Glacial Prairies chapter. We're having it socially distanced in the outdoors with at Willowbrook Conservancy, and that is going to be followed by a hike with Prairie Bob. So if anybody in our region is interested in attending that, just get a hold of me. So I think I've mentioned everything. Thank you, Scott.
Great, thank you, Alice. And for those of you who may be new, but even those of you who've been around for a while, it always kind of blows my mind, all the things that are going on across the organization. I get to visit each of the chapters every year, and I always come away just completely amazed at all of the different things that are happening. The fact that we're both regional and local at the same time, I think is really significant here. So I'd like to give just a brief update on some of the developments in the organization as a whole. First of all, I'll just start at our board meeting that we had this morning. I was reelected to my final 2-year term as president. Because of the term limits we have in our bylaws, I'm not going to be able to repeat that 2 years from now. So we are actively looking for someone to become a vice president of TPE, kind of a president in waiting. And we have a few potential candidates, but if anybody out there is interested, please let me know. This would be the time to take that on. The strategic initiatives we've been working on since I became president are really focused around 2 things. One is building the staff and the organizational infrastructure in such a way that we can be really effective growing our membership, growing our financial support, and growing the amount of volunteer engagement that we have, especially at the chapter level. And the focus in how to do that growth has been really to take the unique characteristic of TPE, that it's a grassroots, local, volunteer-based organization, where those local members and those chapters are really the ones carrying out the mission of the organization, as you've heard today. And that the staff that we have, that we call chapter support, is really there to support the members and the chapters in that activity. It's a little different from most conservation organizations where people consider that the staff is doing most of the work with some help from volunteers. We kind of turn that on its head and say, no, we're here, we are the volunteers who do this, and the staff is there to help the volunteers. The other big initiative that we've undertaken over the last several years is to put together and initiate this landowner services program. We recognized a number of years ago that we have quite a few members or potential members who are landowners that have their own conservation lands and projects. But that as an organization, we really couldn't offer a lot to support them. And so we've really put some things in place, primarily the hiring of Diane Hills and Dan Carter under this NIFWIF grant. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Obviously, as you heard today, the COVID epidemic, pandemic has affected TPE just like everybody else. We were not able to do a lot in the way of burns this spring. We temporarily shut down field trips, but then we put in place, we were one of the first organizations in Wisconsin to figure out how we could safely carry out field trips and other in-person events, at least ones that we hold outdoors. And so we've built that. Some other organizations have actually taken our guidelines as a starting point, and are using them along with us. And you can hear from the presentations we heard earlier that people are starting to do field trips again, which is a really important part of our mission. On the staff side of the organization, the big news is we have a search for an executive director underway. Chris Kirkpatrick, who'd been our executive director since 2012, left the organization at the end of March. I am functioning as the acting executive director while we do the search. That's underway. I have to say we've had a little bit of a slow start. It may be the time of year or the pandemic, but we haven't gotten the kind of response to public posting this that we were hoping for. I know that a lot of you are very deeply involved with other conservation organizations, and we think that a position like this is most likely to be filled with the right person through networks of contacts rather than posting this publicly. And so if any of you have ideas or you know people that we can contact who might be interested in thinking about this position, please do let me know. Obviously, a big addition to the staff has been Dan Carter, who was mentioned several times. He was not able to join us today. He is actually out visiting landowners in the Many Rivers chapter. He spent last night camping outside of Mankato, Minnesota, and he's visiting some landowners this afternoon. Dan has actually already visited 27 landowners since he started at the beginning of May. We did the first one, he and I together, in late May, so it's really amazing. He's been very busy. He's got 23 more visits scheduled, but he still has some slots available. So if any of you are interested or have friends who are interested in having Dan come out and walk your property with you and give you some thoughts about what to do with it and maybe provide some other technical support down the road, please get in touch with him. Our other big addition to the staff has been Diane Hills, who's our communication and outreach coordinator, or I'm sorry, outreach and development coordinator. I get these confused. Diane is partly funded by our NIFWIF grant, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant that is supporting Dan Carter for the next 3 years, and also supports part of part of Diane. The rest of Diane's work is supported by the organization itself. Diane is responsible for creating a landowner-directed outreach and education program really targeted at landowners, but we know that this will be something of great help to everybody in TPE. And then she's also responsible for helping all of you develop and promote outreach events, things like field trips, etc. The other thing on the staff side I'd like to announce, this is just something that happened quite recently, is Joe Rising, who's been our communication coordinator for a little over 7 years now, is going to be leaving the organization at the end of this month, leaving our staff, I should say. Joe is intending to begin working much more actively as a volunteer with TPE, but there are some other opportunities he would like to pursue. And we're very happy that just this last week, Grace Vosen has joined the staff as our communication and outreach specialist. Grace is a younger person who graduated from college a few years ago and first came in contact with TPE as one of the Empire Sauk summer interns a number of years ago. She's a graduate of our Master Naturalist program and has been an instructor in that program, and has been managing the chapter Facebook presence for a number of years. So we're really happy to have Grace joining the staff. The other sort of quote unquote staff update I'll make is I want to give a real thanks to Deborah Noel, who has been the volunteer editor of the Prairie Promoter publication for the last several years, I guess about 5 years now. And she has kind of let go of that job finally. Her personal work life has really gotten pretty intense lately. She works in the healthcare field. And Grace will actually be assuming the role of editor of the Prairie Promoter as a staff person. The only last thing I'll just cover is sort of our financial situation. I think with the epidemic or the pandemic and the economic fallout from that, there is a lot of concern about the economic viability of various nonprofit organizations. And TPE is actually doing reasonably well this year anyway. Our contributions and memberships are down a little bit from where they have been in the past, pretty much in line what other organizations in the area that we talk to are seeing. But most of our contributions come in as part of our annual appeal at the end of the year. And we're hoping that all of you continue to be enthusiastic about what we're doing and some of the new initiatives in the organization, and that we'll certainly consider maintaining and maybe even increasing your financial support of TPE. Just to close on kind of a personal note, whenever I give a presentation about TPE, I use this slide to end up. This is a really favorite quote of mine from Aldo Leopold. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. To me, this is why I have been a member of the Prairie Enthusiasts for the last 18 or 19 years, and why I've devoted such a huge portion of my what I thought would be carefree retirement life to supporting the organization. It's been an enormous challenge for me doing the job, especially taking on both being president and executive director. But it has also been really one of the most exciting and rewarding things I've ever done in my life. And it really is because this is a unique community, or as I think of it, really a set of communities. We have our chapters, we have the groups of people that work on sites together, an interlocked set of communities who care about nature and about the land. And there really is nothing like this out there. And to be in a leadership position in this organization is a tremendous honor, and I thank you for allowing me to do that. So with that, I'm going to turn the program, and it's actually kind of appropriate to do this with a quote from Aldo Leopold here. I'm going to turn the program over to Curt Meine. A lot of you know Curt. He's been a member of the Prairie Enthusiasts for a long time. He's both ecologist and historian, as well as a writer. Jerry Newman mentioned the Driftless Reader, which is he and Keith Coulee published that book just a few years ago. If any of you have not read it yet, please do so. It's a wonderful book. Curt was also very much involved in the effort to turn the Badger ammunition plant up in the Sauk City, Prairie du Sac area into conservation land in collaboration with a whole bunch of other organizations and the Ho-Chunk Nation. So he's definitely a prairie enthusiast. And Curt, I'm going to turn the program to you over for a while, and we're delighted to hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Scott. Let's do a check-in here. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And I'll need a little guidance from you, Scott. It's now 1:20. I can adapt my remarks to the time that you see fit. So do you have a?
Well, we had said this would go to 2 o'clock, so maybe that's a good guideline. The final video we're going to show is about 5 minutes, so
Okay,
that won't
good.
take very long.
Okay, good. That's great. Well, thanks for those very nice words, Scott. I really appreciate it. Thanks for the free advertising for the Driftless Reader. And if you and you're part of the Upper Midwest, ever want to do something with Keith and I, we've really had a lot of fun with that in the last few years. Thanks, Scott, also for all that you've been doing, taking on the extra burdens, keeping the wheels of the organization turning, especially in this very strange time we're all dealing with. Thank you to Diane for suggesting that I try to join you today. And I really hear all those updates from all the chapters and to learn even more actually about what goes on across the landscape through all the activities that everybody's doing, even again during this remarkable time. So thank you to everybody for your wonderful work. It's great to see many familiar names and faces even now. I see Tom Davis looking in the middle of my screen right now. Hi, Tom. And many others out there. This invitation came from Diane originally, and she was wondering if I could talk a little about, well, or even share a story or two, having seen a little program I did last fall in Madison with the Nelson Institute on storytelling and connecting ourselves and our connection and making our connections to land through story. So I said, okay, I think I can do that, but I've had a interesting journey actually to getting to the point of doing this and rethinking it, and for reasons I'll explain in a little bit. But let me switch to my screen here. Let me see if I can do that. Here we go. Okay, I hope everybody can see that. I thought I can just, Scott, can you give me a thumbs up there? All right, so if we were indeed outside right now, as we would all like to be together, we might be taking our walk with our picnic baskets in hand to a shady spot under an oak tree somewhere. This is actually the Nachusa grasslands from a trip a couple years ago, but we cannot do that. Let me then take you to my backyard. Some of you are familiar with this spot. Some of you have come to visit me here, and I'll show you where we are in a second here, but I'm speaking to you now from the kind of house there in the lower left, downhill from the goat prairie above me. And I've been spending a lot of my pandemic time up on this bluff, just doing my own little mini restoration project, actually going back to January, even before we shut down. But it's been a sweet spot for contemplating this time and place we find ourselves in. I know all of you have your spot like this too. And just for orientation, by the way, you're looking about due south, and you can barely see the outlines of blue mounds on the horizon with the Wisconsin River in between. And just again to orient you to where I am, here's about where I am. A couple bluffs in from the east edge of the Driftless area in southern Sauk County along the Wisconsin River. So if you ever come up Castle Road, stop in and say hello. And again, I'm so lucky to have this just literally in my backyard. And I am going to talk, well, let's just leave it there actually. In fact, I'm going to go back to this photo. Since I do have a little bit of time, I'll go with my original plan here. For a lot of us, for all of us, this strange time we find ourselves in has been a time of changed patterns of living and changed ways of thinking even, that we're probably not fully aware of because we're still in the middle of all this. it's given me a chance to work on a writing project that I've been at work on actually for several years. And I'm going to read you just a little bit from an introduction I'm working on because I'm still trying to formulate this myself, but it relates to the theme of storytelling that Diane charged me with. In fact, the whole book project is a series of stories about landscapes in which I've worked over my career and life. And I'm going to just read you a little bit of the introduction I wrote the other day. And it actually has nothing to do with prairies per se, or even the upper Midwest. This is a more general, just kind of passage where I'm trying to orient myself to the project and hopefully eventually readers. So the working title of this book that I'm working on is called This Place in Time. And I'll just leave that title in your head because this opening tries to get at how we orient ourselves. Really the core of this whole project is how we orient ourselves in times of rapid change. And that was even before. I've been working on this, as I mentioned, for several years, but this was even before the onset of our current reality. So I'm just going to read you the opening couple paragraphs of this introduction and maybe let us all sit back a little bit and contemplate a little bit where we are. In fact, that's how this starts. This is will at this point be the draft. It's a draft, but here's the opening. Where am I? It's a familiar question, one that human beings have asked throughout our long journey as a species. From our first tentative steps out onto the savannas of Africa, then across the continents and oceans, eventually to the farthest ends of the earth, we have wandered and wondered. Our consciousness extended well beyond Earth by imagination and telescope and spaceship, seeks to know our place within the entire cosmos, in the grand scheme of things. Modern GPS technology may give us, in an instant, the simple coordinates for our location, but we still ask where we are, what this place is, and how we are embedded in the nested bowls of space. We are creatures of geography. Where am I? By contrast, we rarely, if ever, ask that question. It rings awkward, or at least it does when we confine ourselves to linear thinking about time. We're liable to answer, when am I? What kind of question is that? I am now, of course. And yet the now is as embedded as the here. The bowls of time, from the moment to the millennia to all eternity, hold us in this instant. Modern technology can determine the current time to the nth degree, but we still seek meaning in time's passage and pattern and rhythm. We are creatures of history. Who am I? That question follows. We define ourselves at the intersection of time and space, forge our individuality out of our unique experience. We identify ourselves at the interface of our inner world, built of dreams and DNA and external reality. We brood over the differences among us, but also leap to affirm our connections and common humanity. We crave a comfort zone and strive to build it and secure it and defend it, but we also yearn for adventure, challenge, and growth. Who am I becoming? Who am I able to become? Those questions follow next, testing our vision and our courage, for we are creatures of change. So that's the opening couple paragraphs that I'm playing with just literally this week. Thinking about, again, the moment we find ourselves, but also the places we find ourselves. And from this bluff top goat prairie, over the last 6 months, I've had a lot of time to ponder that again, as all of you have had in your own places. And it really is all about orienting ourselves to this disorienting moment we find ourselves in. We are in a time of extraordinary change in our social systems, our environmental systems and the linkage between our social and environmental changes. And so let's get back to our little corner of the prairie enthusiast region here of the Sauk Prairie. Scott mentioned this in his opening. So I've got about half of this book probably written, and it takes place all over. Here's a chapter about my work in Eastern Europe, and chapter on work I did with the Crane Foundation over in East Asia, actually in Burma. There's other chapters that have to do with the American Southwest and so forth. So I am working on all those spatial scales, and I'm starting right now to work on a chapter about my own local scale here in Sauk County on the northeast edge of the great North American prairie, and here on the edge of the tension zone in Wisconsin. And that chapter is probably, as it's evolving right now, going to tell the story of Badger, the landscape of the old Badger ammo plant that Scott referred to. And again, for those of you not from this area, here's the Sauk Prairie. Here's a little bit, you can see the outline of the Baraboo Hills there in the background. This is a little prairie strip along Highway 12 that one of our old heroes, prairie heroes, not many people will remember Doc Kinchy, but I do. He would sit out in this prairie in his retirement years, planting and weeding and collecting seeds on hot summer days. His is a story I will tell you some other time maybe, but the next passage I'm going to read, the second of the three, goes back, and what I'm doing in these chapters is retracing my own history in these different landscapes. And this is going to go back to a reading that's now 22 years old. I'm looking at that right now. To an essay I wrote for a book some of you may be familiar with called A Place to Which We Belong, which was done by Thousand Friends of Wisconsin. And by the way, I'm happy to see that drawing by Gary Eldred, accompanying a little job we did of printing this essay. And the whole theme of that essay at the outset of the process of deciding the future of the old Badger ammo plant right next to Devil's Lake State Park, the whole theme was change and continuity, which is the theme of this book. So I will probably revisit this essay. In fact, I started to do that this week. And I'll read you the opening part of this, this essay. And it's again about storytelling. It's about the place. And so let me just launch into it. This is from 1998, so it's 22 years old. So I'm rereading this actually now for the first time. For decades, the villages of Sauk City and Prairie du Sac, neighbors along the Wisconsin River in Sauk County, Wisconsin, carried on a lively and ludicrous rivalry, as writer and native son August Derleth described it. Well into the 20th century, the twin villages wrestled over such issues as the siting of the county seat, both lost, and the post office, both won. They struggled, according to Derleth, quote, with the aimless persistence of two dust motes in a sunbeam. Faint echoes of the old contest can still be heard, but the origins of the rivalry are now mostly forgotten. Only rarely does a subject come up, usually in response to questions from curious visitors. In former days, Derleth wrote, it would have been easier to unearth a herd of unicorns than unity on the Sauk Prairie. But time, like the bark on a fire-tested prairie oak, has overgrown the old scars. Although the towns have resisted unification, more and more the local billboards, businesses, institutions, and organizations have adopted the area's informal umbrella designation of Sauk Prairie. The shift in terminology is fitting and holds a hidden promise. The names of the two towns are certainly evocative and they carry political authority, but Sauk Prairie was and is a place. The promise is that here as elsewhere, our politics may yet come to be understood within and subject to the character of the place rather than the other way around. The traditional political divisions can be eased through deeper appreciation of the local landscape and its history. August Derleth's instincts as a regionalist allowed him to appreciate the promise, even as he recounted the more absurd aspects of Sauk Prairie's political history. He presented its rich natural and human history to the world in his Sauk Prairie Saga, his collection of books, poems, and memoirs that he told the story from within. I am much attached to this corner of the earth, he wrote in the early 1940s, not only because it possesses great natural beauty in abundance, but because it affords me a necessary continuity. And I emphasize that last phrase in this essay, a necessary continuity. There is pith to that phrase, not only for writers and regionalists, but for all of us displaced moderns. Let's expand on his remark. Continuity is necessary because change is constant. And as the pace of cultural change is accelerated, the need for continuity has grown increasingly important and desperate. Community institutions that have traditionally provided a degree of continuity now face the challenge of keeping pace. What does our contemporary longing to strengthen our families, neighborhoods, and communities represent? But a concerted effort to weave at one end of the social fabric what rapid economic and technological change are fraying at the other end. Until recently, however, discussions of continuity have rarely included the landscapes in which our communities are embedded. Can there be any continuity if the very sources and settings of our communities are left out of the picture? Sauk Prairie will not be alone in confronting such questions. It does, however, enjoy certain advantages. It has the richly textured past that Derleth and others have chronicled. And it has that name, which makes it difficult to ignore its origins in Indian country and in tall grass prairie. In Sauk Prairie, as elsewhere, much of the past and of the natural has been obliterated, but much still is on display. So that essay goes on to talk about the Sauk Prairie setting and the dilemma that we faced 22 years ago of what would happen to the lands of the old Badger Ammo plant. Here's a picture you can see from Ken Lange's priceless study of vegetational history in this county, showing the Badger Ammo plant occupying the northern third or so of the historic Sauk Prairie, which was about 14,000 acres. And many of us, and many of you know a lot of the people involved in this long struggle, Charlie Luthen and Mike Mossman and so many others. We saw that opportunity. We knew that we had once in a lifetime, really, opportunity to secure this place. So I won't say too much more about it right now, but I do want to read you one last piece. And I was going to read this whole essay. It's a new essay, not yet published, but I chose not to, and I'll tell you why. The essay is about working on the Ho-Chunk portion of the old Badger plant, which is the northwest corner here, immediately at the foot of the Baraboo Hills. And the essay describes an event last fall when Sauk County recognized its first Indigenous Peoples Day. It's actually a 3-day weekend. And on the first day, a small group of volunteers went out to help collect prairie seed for eventual use by the Ho-Chunk Nation on their property at the old Badger Ammo plant. 1,500 acres of the former plant now. And before I read this last piece, I'll just give you again, the historical setting. When are we? Well, if we want to understand when we are, we have to understand a lot of stuff, from geology, of course, to recent history. But in the middle of all that history, of course, is the native history, 12,000 post-glacial millennia, in which native peoples did live on and live with this land. And again, many of you are familiar with this. But we are in this map, it's called Winnebago, but of course the name now is Ho-Chunk, that the nation reclaimed for itself back in the 90s. So you can situate yourself here if you're in Wisconsin. I won't go into great detail here on the history of the Ho-Chunk Nation, but it's a story of continuity and disruption and persistence and resilience and restoration. It's a story deeply embedded, tragically, in our landscape, but also triumphantly, as the nation has reclaimed its place and re-established itself in lands from which it was removed. I was going to read the whole essay about this, but I decided not to, and again, I'll get to that in a minute. But for those of you who are not so familiar with the Badgeramo plant, but let me just start reading this. Let me go back to this and mention. So I was one of those volunteers picking prairie seeds last fall. And I wrote this essay, and I'm eager to share it with everybody, but I'm also very cognizant of the need to do this in a different way than even I have ever done as a writer before. Because this is a story that involves the nation, I am going to extra lengths to make sure I have permission from the nation to share it with others. I haven't yet secured that permission in the way I feel comfortable with. And so I'm only going to read you the portion of the essay I do feel comfortable sharing. And hopefully, eventually, I can share the whole thing with you. But to me, I'm trying to model exactly what the essay talks about, and that is how to do the healing of the landscape through restoration, but also recognize that healing has to involve the human relationships on the land as well. I hope that Randy Pullman, some of you may know Randy and have worked with Randy. He's the lead land manager for the Ho-Chunk Nation, living in La Crosse, but working all across the nation's lands. Randy was unable to join me, so I'm just going to read a portion of this again. The portion of the former badger plant that the nation now owns goes by the name Ma-Wakan-Chunk. Ma-Wakan-Chunk in Ho-Chunk means the sacred earth. Immediately adjacent to De-Wakan-Chunk, which means the sacred lake or spirit lake, as sometimes it's translated, which white folks decided to call Devil's Lake. So the essay is actually called Healing the Sacred Earth. So I'll keep that in mind, the name Ma-Wakan-Chunk. Let me go back to this map. So I'll read you this last piece, and if you have any questions or comments, if we still have time, I'd love to get your thoughts. The story of Sacred Earth involves multiple episodes of painful transformation and alienation. The signing of the spurious 1837 treaty, the Ho-Chunk Nation's delegates believed that they had agreed to terms that granted the tribe 8 years to leave Wisconsin. They were then informed that the treaty gave them 8 months. In 1942, following the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the farming families of Sauk Prairie were allowed 3 months to auction off their farms, equipments, and livestock, and to vacate their properties. In an ironic inversion of cultural stratigraphy, Ma-Wakan-Chunk now hosts a modest memorial to the farmers who gave up their land to the war effort. As the Cold War wound down and the badger plant stayed still, U.S. Army workers signed up for unemployment. When the munitions plant was decommissioned in 1997, years of difficult controversy about its future began. That future was finally defined through an intense process of community engagement, education, and dialogue. That conversation included the Ho-Chunk Nation, federal, state, and local governments, nonprofit organizations, businesses, educators, and neighboring landowners. The resulting consensus document included a directive. Future uses and activities should, quote, contribute to the reconciliation and resolution of past conflicts involving the loss and contamination of the natural environment, the displacement of Native Americans and Euro-American farmers, and the effects of war. It is never easy to turn a page on pain, much less on generations of trauma, but all pledged to try. And it is not easy to know how to be an ally in that effort. How to Reconstitute Kinship. I should interject here, this book that this essay will go into is built around the theme of kinship. Kinship between people and non-humans. Perhaps reconstituting kinship begins with small acts that recognize and reconstitute our connections in the land. Here is the Ho-Chunk property. That 1,500 acres of the Badger Emma land, by the way, is the largest portion of contiguous land the nation now owns in its ancestral territory. Many of you know this story. The Ho-Chunk do not have a reservation land. They're scattered about portions of their former ancestral lands. Here we are out picking last fall on a very chilly day. If you remember, some of you will, that I think it was second weekend in October. It was way cold. It was a stiff wind blowing that morning. So here at Mawakanchunk, the process of reconciliation may begin with silence and listening with respect to the stories of the land. Those stories are layered across time, from the Precambrian quartzite to the present. They include stories of ancient oceans and upheavals, of rocks tumbling against long ago seashores, of recurring ice ages and changing climates, of all the changing host of living beings, and of all the people. Like the prairie here, these stories exist in fragmented and isolated remnants. Many stories are just barely hanging on. Many others have blinked out. But that is why we are here today. Together, we might be able to collect just enough bits of story to plant and grow a new chapter. Here it may also begin with gathering seeds to establish a new prairie. There is a fine debate unfolding these days about approaches to ecological restoration under conditions of accelerating climate change. Our region of southern Wisconsin is experiencing the effects. Over the past century, average temperatures have risen about 2 degrees. Extreme precipitation and disastrous floods occur with increasing frequency. Why restore prairie when the world in which the prairie evolved is being so quickly and radically transformed? Why plant prairie when the climate we humans are creating will make such efforts obsolete? Is restoring a native ecosystem an exercise in futility? How do we make a future that bears no apparent resemblance or connection to the past? Those are questions, by the way, that I address in other ways throughout this book. On this chilly morning collecting seeds next to an old parking lot with big blue stems sprouting through cracks in the asphalt, we can imagine answers. We can see a prairie sucking carbon into its soils, filtering water through its roots, hosting meadowlarks and bobolinks and rusty-patched bumblebees amid its tall grasses and blooming forbs, and maybe someday even bison and prairie chickens. We can listen to the words of the Ho-Chunk people, the people of the sacred voice, inviting back the Mosca, the prairie, and offering praise to Maona, the earth maker. We can seek to be allies in this work by making common cause, knowing that we will need to honor our kinship more than ever while facing our shared and uncertain future. I wrote this essay back before the pandemic, so that uncertain future, of course, is even more foggy to us all right now. But we're all thinking about this. So I'm doing just like everybody I know who's listening in here, thinking about how we see our way, obviously, through the present crisis, but we also begin to think about how we're going to reorient ourselves when we begin to turn forward again. So I'll leave this, and I think, is there one last photo here? Yeah, wherever you are in your different sites across the regions where the prairie enthusiasts work, all of our places have these stories embedded within them. So this is a plea to return to story, because story is what helps orient ourselves amid rapid change, social and environmental change. And knowing all those layers, sometimes difficult layers to talk about, as in the case with Native American removal, as in with confronting issues of racism and environmental change and all the things that are swirling us around right now. Turning back to those stories and recognizing that every time we all go out there and sit in our prairie or collect seeds or remove invasives or just listen to the wind, we're all part of that story ourselves as we go forward. So consider your place and your stories that you are now writing on the land as well as we do all this work. I'll leave you also with a little, another free advertisement if I can. This fall, our friends up at in Reedsburg at the Worm Farm Institute, some of you are familiar with their work, will be hosting, despite the pandemic, the Art Detour, the tour around southern Sauk County, this fall. And I've been working with them exactly on this theme of working in stories from the land. The Art Detour, for those of you who are familiar with it, will go on this year, and it is socially distanced, so it will be easy to do. For those of you not familiar, this is a loop, a self-guided tour that integrates art into the landscape. And I've been working with them to actually work in this theme of stories from the land. So I'll share more information for those of you who might be familiar with it. So again, I want to thank you for letting me air some of this. It's fun to actually share some writing. It's like playing music. If you're not sharing it, it just doesn't feel right in these socially distanced times. So I'll end up there. I know there's a couple last things that the meeting is going to try to do, but I'd be happy to answer any questions or share any further thoughts if there's time.
Well, thank you very much, Curt. That was tremendous. And want to kind of maybe open this up for at least a couple of minutes if anybody has any questions or comments that they'd like to share. No, it's a little hard. That's a lot to absorb.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
To think about.
While people have a moment to think, let me just mention that I did reach out to Randy Pullman at the Ho-Chunk Nation, and he's of course familiar with prairie enthusiasts, and he was very sorry he couldn't join me. He says, "Oh yeah, I'd love to be able to connect more with them," and so maybe we can begin to open up some addition. I know a lot of people here do work with the nation or other perhaps communities and native folks in your part of the world, but perhaps we can start to do some more of that in the future. And I think we'd have some very, very eager and willing partners with the nation.
Yeah, I will say, just as a comment, we have begun an effort to reach out. As you and I have talked about, Curt, this is a long term and involves a lot of listening. But we are. This came up in connection with this Hanley project. We really wanted to understand the real history of this prior to the European settlement. And so we're beginning a process of reaching out, and I think some of our other chapters as well are doing that with the First Nations people in their area. We cover a pretty broad area. It's not just the Ho-Chunk, but
right.
it is something I think, you know, in thinking about the response to the Black Lives Matter protests and things that have come up, one of the things that I've talked to a lot of people about that across the organization, and as an organization, we feel tremendously connected, kind of spiritually almost, with the First Nations people. We're in a sense carrying on some of the things that they did when they lived in the land before European settlement. And so there's a lot of sense of wanting to reach out and hear these stories and think about how we can partner together for the future.
Yeah, and let me say to that this was very much on our minds even 20 plus years ago when we were all working at the old Badger Animal Plant lands, because in fact we always knew and understood that the nation had a vital role to play here. And a lot of my own personal commitment to this was reaching out and engaging in conversations, and as you say, listening. The last thing I'd say about your comment there, Scott, was it is all about long-term relationship building. It isn't just about a one-shot deal or one project or one place. It's about building long-term, lasting connections and relationships. And so, you know, you don't have to do everything overnight. These are huge issues, obviously, and yet we all care about them and we all want to be able to contribute in some way. We're fortunate here, I think, in at Badger, we have this built-in ability, and that's what my essay that I read to you is all about, is how to be. What is it to be a good ally to Native nations as they are reclaiming their places and roles, and now they're all knowledge and cultural knowledge. So it's an ongoing journey, and I feel really honored, actually, that I've been able to do this work with the Ho-Chunk Nation over the years, even though it's just still starting. So I hope we can all together find different ways. And it starts with just learning the stories of your place. You know, it really does.
Yeah.
Curt, this is Steve Winter from the Minnesota Driftless chapter.
Yeah, hi, Steve.
Thank you for your presentation, your talking today. And so as we've been planning the 2021 annual Prairie Enthusiast meeting, we've had discussions where we've heard interest in having somebody speak about indigenous use of prairie plants or indigenous connections to the land. Would I be able to contact you to get some leads on who I could contact in this area that would be good people to hopefully connect with and see if we can get somebody as a speaker at the meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to help any way I can. Usually, you know, in different parts of our landscape, I may not be as closely familiar with, and you may have some local folks who do know more than I, but I can begin to contribute in some way. Reminds me that some of you may have seen this. Some of you are familiar with the botanist and writer Robin Kimmerer. I know because this is exactly her kind of audience. Robin Kimmerer is a Potawatomi by background, and in her beautiful book, Braiding Sweetgrass, many people are familiar with it. But she recently wrote a lovely essay about Midwestern prairies. It was about a year ago. She did her PhD in Madison in the botany department, where she and I first got to know each other. And so she revisited some of her Midwestern, she teaches out in New York now, but revisited her experience with prairies and wrote a really stunningly beautiful essay that I can share with Scott or Diane to share with the rest of you. It's a really
that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, and anyone else? Thank you, Steve. All right.
This is Gary.
Yes, Gary, go ahead.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Curt's talk there. And what I was thinking of is Curt was traveling his way through those thought processes. Is he did it much more eloquently and more colorfully than I did, but the reaching out and the connection to the land and that stuff. And that was kind of the message I was trying to get with the Discovery Prairie Project in Nebraska. And it occurred to me that what I'm trying to bring about is the idea that do we allow distance to change our perspective of what we care about, what we love, and what we want to give back to the earth and to the land that we are all connected with, whether it's 500 miles away or 5 miles away. So thank you, Curt, for putting a polish on the rough nugget that I threw out there this morning. Good job.
Well, Gary, you know, we all have learned so much from you, and I know this has been such a strong interest of yours for so long, and knowing your Nebraska landscape too, as well as all that you've done here. You know, any kind of writing like this doesn't come from an individual. It all comes from our communities and the work we do together, and I'm very conscious of that. So, you know, when I'm writing about prairies, I'm thinking of you and Rich Henderson and Scott and so many others who are on this call who have been mentors and guides for so many people. So, you know, these kind of ideas that we all have in our heads, when we sit down to try to compose them, we're really reflecting so many other people who played roles in our lives. So thank you.